So thanks to you all for coming to the October Research Group talk. As you know, we're a network community of practice of people who work on clean energy and climate change and the green transition, and it's open to everyone. So if you know anyone that might be interested, whether they're involved in academics or just simply interested citizens, it's open to everyone. And we're always open also to having speakers, particularly people that are working in clean energy, to come and talk about these issues. So today, I'm very pleased to present Yui Fujiki. She's a former MA student of Simon Fraser, and her project is about anti-nuclear social movements in Hokkaido and in Ontario. And if you've been paying any attention to the news, you know that nuclear has been in the news a lot recently. First of all, because we just finished the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, where Yui is from. And obviously with the film that came out last year, Oppenheimer, it's really raised a lot of awareness about the ongoing dangers of both nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. And ironically, at the same time, as we know, globally, there's a huge push around nuclear energy, viewed and presented by the Canadian government and the IEA as a clean energy alternative. And what we also know is that this nuclear waste lasts for thousands of years, very difficult to handle, and if it gets loose, it can really have major deleterious effects on human health, as well as ecosystems. So it's a really serious issue, but at the same time, both Ontario and the Canadian government have backed the spread of nuclear energy. Alex was writing about small modular reactors, and we'll talk about that during the discussion. And most recently, a small town in Ontario, I think about 200 full-time residents in Nace, has approved the first long-term permanent repository for nuclear waste in Canada. And so this took more than 10 years for the Canadian Nuclear Waste Authority to get anyone to approve it. And it really has major ramifications because it will house this nuclear waste that has been piling up in nuclear sites across Ontario for more than 3 decades, and they had no solution for what to do with it. And so now it'll be housed in this geological repository. And so 200 people basically made that decision for Canada. So Yui is working for Project Ploughshares now. It's an NGO that is involved in various issues related to peace, including nuclear energy. And she'll be talking about her research, which is really impressive in the fact that she spent time both in Ontario and Japan. It's a rare comparison to have someone who can do both, speaking to the stakeholders and working with local groups that were involved in nuclear waste. So Yui, would you like to share your slides?
Okay. Quick background. I grew up in Hiroshima. Hiroshima has a huge nuclear histories back in World War II. And I actually did another master back in Hiroshima doing the international relations and also nuclear disarmament. So that leads me to think about the nuclear energy development, because in Japan also we started witnessing Fukushima's Daiichi accident, and also my city also developing the nuclear energy. So that led me to my interest in this research, and I'm currently doing some work on the nuclear weapons control and also nuclear energy as well. So I wanna start from the global public resistance to the nuclear weapons and also nuclear energy. It started around the 1960s and the 1970s, and it concerns about safety and environmental impacts and also human rights as well. And it back in Japan, it raised because of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki's history as well, but also the Fukushima Daiichi accident as well. In Ontario, Canada, anti-nuclear activism has long been intertwined with Indigenous people and also some local sectors. For this case, I'm focusing on Ontario. The territory is also Anishinaabe First Nations territory as well. And I was able to speak with some Kaboik First Nations that mainly opposing to this project. In Hokkaido, Japan, anti-nuclear movement has taken unique character shaped by culture and also the environmental impact and also human rights as well. And also there is Ainu indigenous people, which is the only one indigenous people in Japan, and their territory is also affected by this project. Go to the next. Yeah. So the primary questions for this research is guided by my inquiry revolved around understanding of political, societal, and geographical context within this nuclear waste management facilities constructions. So here there's research questions. How do social movements shape nuclear waste policy amid local challenges? So as a research design, I employed some mixed research method, interviews and some data analysis, and also the literature review as well. The research design, as I mentioned here, it's a social movement theory. It's political opportunities and resource mobilizations, and also identity politics, which I'm going to explain later. The limitations here is that there's a smaller population in Sutsu, and also the average age is more than 75 years old. So it's kind of like there's a big difference between Ontario, the sector that for doing the opposition is quite older age in Sutsu, and also the sources is so limited as well. And that's why key local voices were hard to reach. And Ontario, on the other hand, had a bigger data and also the export input as well. So data detail was uneven between those cases because of those factors. Yeah, so that's the limitations for my research. And go to the next one. Yeah. Before I dive into this research, I thought it's interesting to introduce the myth around the nuclear waste. The central challenge of managing nuclear waste is its extreme longevity. So unlike ordinary waste, the nuclear waste actually, the hazardous isotope remain dangerously radioactive, and for some cases it lasts hundreds of thousands of years. So this means that nuclear waste is not just short-term threat, but it's become a long-term threat as well. So that's the one I mentioned in the technical difficulty. So there's longevity, contamination, and technology. For the technological side, several layers of difficulties arise. It's kind of difficult because you have to cool the nuclear waste in the water, and it's really hot and highly radioactive. So it's like there's a need for the high technology, and also because of the longevity, they have to spend so much money on people and also the safety as well. So that's the first sample that I mentioned. And the second one is social challenges. As I'm taking this research, the oppositions and also intergenerational risks and transparency. So positions we see from Hokkaido and Ontario case as well, but some other parts of Japan, like for example Fukushima, and also after Chernobyl accident, there is so many of the nuclear oppositions happening in Germany and a different country as well. And the intergenerational risks, I want to say that nuclear waste, when they dump in the underground, it causes the environmental impact and also the human rights. They put a threat on the human rights as well. And transparency, it's kind of difficult to share the sources, the process of, for example, like securities or maybe risk assessment when they are processing on the construction on the facility. So for Ontario and especially Hokkaido case, the transparency became a huge problem because most of the people who are also opposing to this project, or maybe those general citizens, they don't know what's going on behind. And it's interesting case is that in Fukushima, the government doesn't disclose the information about what's going on after they dump the nuclear waste. It's actually in fact the people there is affected by the nuclear waste, and the agriculture and also their human rights is affected by that accident. So the other parts, I would say the high cost and nuclear proliferation. High cost, I think I mentioned in the technical difficulty part as well, because they require the long-term safety and operations. So it costs a lot, and the total management cost is actually really high, higher than the most of the energy. So, and also the second part is a nuclear proliferation. So the plutonium, when the nuclear chains reaction happens, when they produce nuclear energy, the chain is actually same as when they produce nuclear weapons. And then same goes to when they do the decommissioning and treat the nuclear waste. They can extract the plutonium, and which is going to the nuclear arms and the nuclear energy both ways. So there's a lot of discussions globally about the nuclear proliferations behind this nuclear energy development.
Just to reinforce that point, I don't know if you all follow the news stories that are coming out of the Hanford nuclear site. It was one of the original nuclear power plants in Washington state, and was decommissioned more than a decade ago. But because of the water pools that they were using to cool the rods, the control rods, all of that water is completely contaminated along with the rods, and they haven't found the solution yet. And they're spending millions of dollars just to try to manage the radioactivity of it. So all of this becomes a public liability essentially, and the private companies just walk away from it.
That water, is that involved with the drinking water as such, or?
They're worried that if it leached into the ground, it would contaminate the soil and potentially.
So it's sort of the underground water base that's sort of away, hopefully, from other.
Yeah, it's separated for now. It's in these pools, but they're trying to figure out what to do with it. So it's a tough engineering problem.
Okay. So I wanna explain about the main research that I am using in this research, which is the 3 views on social movements. As I mentioned, there are identity politics, resource mobilization, and political opportunities. So basically, if you take a look at this chart, the identity politics and political opportunity, I put a protest and advocacy there. I just want to explain that. So for that part, when the political opportunities and identity politics happens together, we see the protest and advocacy. In these cases, the shared identity motivate community to act when the political context is favorable. For example, Ontario municipalities downstream from Chalk River passed the resolution opposing the NSDF, while in Hokkaido large-scale protests emphasize the threat to the fishing culture. So these actions may not directly like policy, but they shift the political environment. So that forces policymakers to confront questions of legitimacy, consent, and long-term risk in nuclear waste governance. So that arrow I showed how it applies to these cases of nuclear waste policy. And if you take a look at top part, political opportunities and resource mobilizations, when these two happens, it leads to the policy influence and lobbying. So when political openings appear, for example, licensing reviews, municipal votes, or government interventions, and the movements have resources to act, they can strategically target decision makers. So in Ontario's case, this means petitions and legal challenges submitted to the CNSC, which is the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commissions. In Hokkaido, it involves alliance with the prefectural government to slow down the siting processes. So here movements directly enter the policy processes, so it shapes how nuclear waste facilities are reviewed and regulated. And yeah, so if you take a look at the left side, identity politics and resource mobilization. When these two happens, we get the grassroots organizing. So in nuclear waste cases, this happens when communities share a strong identity, such as Indigenous sovereignty in Ontario or coastal fishing culture in Hokkaido, and mobilizing resources like volunteers and fundings and also the advocacy networks. So this combination allows them to pressure policymakers by grounding oppositions in cultural rights and also the local identity, which forces national regulators to consider issues like Indigenous consent and the protections of traditional livelihoods in nuclear waste policy. And if you take a look at the oath, so this is the left side. I mentioned the stronger movement. This shows what's going to happen when those three are combined. When identity politics and the resource mobilization, political opportunities all align, movements are most effective. They not only mobilize people and resources, but also time their actions to moments of political leverage. So this full combination can block or delay projects, demand stronger consultations, and also it shows that successful oppositions or influence depends not on the factor, but on the interaction of all three dimensions, and each reinforces the others. So I want to dive into this Ontario's case. The Ontario's case, the nuclear waste facility they are trying to build is called Near Surface Disposal Facility, NSDF, and the proposed this NSDF designed to store low-level radioactive waste from Chalk River Laboratories, known as CRA, and the other national programs. So the idea is to reduce Canada's liability for low-level waste currently stored in interim facilities. And technically it is an engineered contaminant mode, and only waste that meets the waste acceptance criteria, known as WAC, will be accepted to ensure compatibility with the design and safe long-term contaminant. So the facility is proposed for the Chalk River Laboratories site in Deep River, Ontario, near the Ottawa River. Just want to mention this, Deep River, the neighbors living in this site, they drink water from Deep River. Basically, their drinking water is coming from Deep River. That's a big discussion in this case as well. This is kind of like where the main concerns arise. Environmental groups, municipalities, and scientists worry about the possibility of contamination reaching the Ottawa River, which provides drinking water for downstream communities. So broader environmental impacts on ecosystem and water systems are also being questioned. On top of this, the site is located on the unceded territory of Arconium Anishinaabe people, that raises serious questions about free, prior, informed consent and whether the project aligns with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Land. Other criticisms include the adequacy of water waste verification and whether licensing and oversight can fully guarantee safety over the long term. So, but to understand the Ontario case, in Ontario, the major nuclear anti-nuclear movement happened 1950s, 1960s, and this opposition is actually kind of the natural flow from that moment, and the major resistance happened in 2020s, and the focus has shifted onto the NSDF at the Chalk River. So activists point to Chalk River's meltdown in 1952 as a reminder of nuclear risks as well. And most recently in 2024, the Kaboik First Nation launched a legal challenge on the project, and basically arguing that their right to free, prior, and informed consent as well. So right now they hired lawyer for this case as well, and they are bringing these cases to the court to discuss. So in summary, while the NSDF is technically designed to be safe, oppositions kind of remains too strong because of the location, environmental risks, and the questions of indigenous sovereignty. I just put some quotes from Kaboik First Nation. It kind of left me kind of like impressions through interview. So now let's move to Hokkaido's case. The nuclear waste facility they are trying to build is different from the NSDF, which is called the Deep Geological Repository, known as DGR. And it's designed for high-level radioactive waste. It's kind of like opposite to the NSDF. The plan involves burying waste at least 300 meters underground with boreholes that could extend as deep as 5,000 meters. And the potential locations are the small coastal town of Sutsu. I didn't mention it here, but Kamoenai as well, which is closer town to the Sutsu as well. So these communities are being asked to host a project that will fundamentally alter their identity. The geological challenges are significant. Experts point out that the soft sedimentary and volcanic rocks in the regions are prone to cracking and fissures, and making long-term contaminant risky as well. And because high-level radioactive waste remains hazardous for tens of thousands of years, the safety concerns stretch across the generations. Environmental and community concerns are critical. The fishing and tourism industries that define Hokkaido's coastal town could be permanently damaged, and the residents fear both contaminations and the long-term stigma of being labeled a nuclear waste site. Also, political oppositions has also been strong, and the governor of Hokkaido has consistently resisted the project, and pointing to the 2000 ordinance that bans permanent nuclear waste disposal in the prefecture. So in terms of social movement, as I mentioned, the resistance began gaining momentum in October 2020 when Sutsu and Kamoenai first applied to be considered for preliminary research. So that decision sparked widespread oppositions not only from local residents but also from surrounding municipalities as well. So the movement has several defining features, including residents, citizens group, and municipal leaders working together, and it grounds its resistance in both environmental concerns and local rights, and it continues to take visible forms through protests, petition drives, and public campaigns. So for this case as well, I put some quotes from one of the sector that I interviewed. So As Andy mentioned, I wanted to introduce the DGL in Ignis. Ontario was selected in 2024 to host Canada's first deep geological repository for used nuclear fuel, which is a high-level waste facility. The repository will be located 500 to 800 meters underground in stable crystalline rocks and uses multiple safety barriers. In a 2024 community vote, as I showed there, 77% of residents supported the proceeding, reflecting both trust in the safety measures and recognition of the economic opportunities and project brings, and such as long-term jobs, skill development, and also the infrastructure investment as well. So, comparing these cases, we see that technical safety alone is not enough. The success of a nuclear waste facility also depends on community perceptions, trust, and tangible benefits people associate with the project. So, I wanna move on to the key findings of those two cases. Across both cases, first of all, I made a chart dividing into those three theories. Across both cases, the combination of those three theories explains the dynamics of community response. Strong local identity motivates resistance. Effective mobilization strategies determine how that resistance is expressed, and the political opportunities shape whether communities can influence outcomes. So this framework helps us understand why communities like those Ontario and Hokkaido respond slightly different way to the nuclear waste facilities. In Ontario, as you can see on the left side of the chart, the strong connection to land and Indigenous sovereignties, identity politics motivated resistance to resist the nuclear waste projects. So grassroots organizations effectively pooled resources, collaborating with NGOs, scientists, and also the legal experts to strengthen their advocacy. And the existence of political opportunities, such as public hearings and referendums, allowed communities to leverage that identity and those resources to influence decisions. The combination of these three factors enabled as I mentioned, covered First Nations or any environmental law organizations, and also the local groups that live close by to this area to mount an effective and sustained campaign. So in Hokkaido, a similar pattern emerges, although with some limitations. So residents' identity as a community depend on fishing, tourism, and environmental stewardship that fuel the resistance. So they mobilize resources through donations and also the public events and social media campaigns. Political opportunity was more constrained due to the centralized decision making, but local activism, especially through symbolic actions and public forums, still allow the community to voice concerns and also organize collective resistance. So yeah, I wanna conclude with lessons for anti-nuclear movements. I want to highlight some lessons that these two cases studies offer for understanding anti-nuclear movements more broadly. What we see in both Ontario and Hokkaido is that successful mobilization depends on the interaction of three factors: identity politics and political opportunities and social resource mobilizations. So first, grounding activism in community identity and rights provides movements with strong legitimacy. In Ontario, this takes the form of Indigenous sovereignty and recognition of territory. In Hokkaido, it is rooted in the defense of cultural and the economic identity tied to fishing and also tourism. By linking nuclear waste policy to questions of place, rights, and community well-being, these movements frame the issues as more than technical debates. It becomes a matter of justice. So the second, the resource ability to mobilize and sustain resources is essential. Legal expertise, funding, and organizer capacity allows movements to persist over the long term. For example, the support of organizations from the Environmental Law Association in Canada has enabled First Nations to challenge federal policy in court, while in Japan, citizens networks and local governments provide the capacity to coordinate resistance. The third, seizing political opportunities can amplify movement influence. In Ontario, this includes engaging with regulatory processes and international norms such as the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And in Hokkaido, political opportunities emerged when the prefectural governor took public stance against the repository. And most importantly, these strategies are most effective when all three are combined. Grassroots organizing builds local power, lobbying channels, concerns into formal policy, and also protest keeps public visibility high. So together they create pressure on policymakers and shape the trajectory of nuclear waste policies. Finally, both cases demonstrate that the local struggle resonate more broadly when connected to global frameworks, whether through environmental justice, indigenous rights, or international safety standards. So this underscores that anti-nuclear movements are not only a local phenomena, but they contribute to the larger debates about governance, stability, and intergenerational responsibility. So in short, the lesson here is that effective mobilization is not simply oppositions. It is more strategic, sustained, and also capable of reshaping policy itself outcomes. By weaving together identity, resource, and political opportunities, anti-nuclear movements can directly influence how nuclear waste policy is developed, contested, and ultimately decided. So finally, I'd like to acknowledge the organizations that made this research possible. This work was generously supported by the Below Globe Foundation and Simon Fraser University's Political Science Department. And their funding and encouragement enabled me to conduct this research and engage with communities and analyze these important findings for this nuclear waste governance case. And thank you for making this work possible, and thank you so much for listening to this presentation.
Thanks so much, Yui. Can you start sharing your presentation, and then we can just open it up to questions or comments. I think the lessons that you drew out are important for anyone that wants to influence policy. Anyone have any comments or suggestions? Anything they want to ask Yui?
Well, I sort of have one, is that sometimes nuclear power is, it said, okay, this is the way to solve our problems. Now, you mentioned on what Magnus interviewed was this, you had this concept of renewable energy across Canada, which would not include nuclear energy, right?
Right.
It would include having more solar power in Ontario, it seems.
Well, we would need vast installations of solar, geothermal, and wind. And some of my colleagues in this group dispute the idea that there could be enough energy to cover things without nuclear, and then the problem with solar and wind is it's intermittent. So that is the attraction of nuclear, is you can turn it on and off at any time.
Oh, so but you're of the opinion that it would not need nuclear, the scheme that you,
Yeah, because we have such a blessing with the amount of hydroelectricity that we have in BC, Manitoba, and Quebec, none of which is connected to the other provinces.
no, it was in this group, there's people that don't agree with, I mean, in this room, I suppose, that doesn't agree totally with the scheme.
I don't know, what's that?
That you have, because that goes counter to any nuclear, oh, okay, one thing I'm just gonna add to it. Would your scheme include the ending of the actual nuclear power that we now have in Ontario and so on?
Yeah, well, in fact, if you look at the levelized cost of energy, that's the standard they use for how much does energy cost, nuclear is way more expensive than any other renewable,
But what would happen?
including batteries.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
What would happen to the nuclear plants that exist under your scheme then?
Yeah.
Would
Well-
it be just dormant?
They time out after a while, they're decommissioned, and then you still have to deal with the waste.
Okay.
So if we create even more waste, we don't even have a solution for the waste that we've created up to this point.
Okay.
Alex, did you want to say something about small modular reactors and why the Canadian government is attracted to that?
Yeah, that's kind of being talked about a decent amount right now. They've approved one for the Darlington nuclear facility. Essentially, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a modular nuclear reactor that you can, in theory, move around. It's smaller, it's remote, you can put it in remote communities. The problem being, if you look at the roadmap that the Canadian government has published about it, there's no cost estimates for how they would deal with the waste. There just simply isn't a number there. And they have very, very rough estimates for kind of the cost of implementation itself. So there's a lot of these kind of unknown factors with it, and we're going ahead because it's this new technology that's kind of really exciting. But of course, social acceptability, as we talked about so much, there's a lot of pushback with that. We would get a lot of our uranium potentially from the Northwest Territories. That's also where they funded the Manhattan projects. There's a decent amount of, trauma and stigma associated with that. What are we gonna do with the waste? Some modular reactors have slightly different isotopes in their waste, so that creates a whole other issue as well. Don't ask me about isotopes, I do politics. And then kind of on top of that, there's only 2 operational ones in the world, and they're in China and Russia. So we can learn things from that as well, but it of course then brings the comparative cases a little bit more difficult given the countries that they are operational in. And then also for BC, I've written a paper on this recently. The last 5-ish years were good, or for the next 5-ish years were good for energy, especially with the opening of Site C. It actually has a larger capacity than originally intended. So I agree with Dr. Hira I don't think BC specifically would need any nuclear now or for the foreseeable future, but of course I can't speak to 10, 15 years, kind of what that's looking like. But as of right now, I'm on kind of the same wavelength there.
You may have heard that the uranium that was mined in Saskatchewan going back decades has led to very high cancer rates among those communities. So even if you move to SMRs, that seem attractive, you're still dealing with the fundamental problem of radioactivity. RT?
Yeah, I just had a question about your research. I saw in the case studies how, for example, in I believe Ontario, the case study in Ontario, the main concern based on the quote and just what you were talking about the movement, a lot of the issue was lack of political representation from the Indigenous communities and sort of a lack of, they felt like they weren't being considered or their voice was not they were not on the table. Do you think these movements, or the one also in Japan, the question was mostly the question of nuclear waste, or was it more about not having a say in these projects rather?
I would say both. I think for Ontario's case, there's more political representation comparing to Hokkaido's case, and they actually did suggestions or proposals against the NSDF, but actually they didn't hear the reply from government. So it stops at the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commissions. It's kind of hard to reach them and try to, get through their voices to those high people. And I think that's the issue that they have. outside of political representation, but also at the same time they questioned about, as I mentioned, the United Nations, indigenous people's rights, because it's kind of against what they have on United Nations. And that's the reason why they questions with hiring lawyers and bringing to the court. And I think Ontario's case is more assertive. They are trying to push forward. But Hokkaido's case, it's really difficult to have experts. For example, lawyer, environmental lawyer, and physics experts. It's actually it's less in Japan.
Right.
And for Hokkaido, I know people questions about their own indigenous rights for suits because the town is so small. If they don't rely on fishing and also tourism, basically they cannot operate their town. So I would say it's different reason, but in both Ontario and Hokkaido, they are questioning both the two perspectives that you mentioned.
I bring up something, it's 1980s. It was like the mid or late 1980s, either northern Saskatchewan or Manitoba, there was a major protest by Aboriginal groups about, maybe you've heard about this?
No, I haven't.
About uranium mining or something, that happened in the mid and late 1980s. There was an attempt at a protest and so.
Yeah, for a long time, the Canadian government had one of the leading designs for nuclear power, the CANDU reactor. And so it was a major export push, but they didn't keep up with the technology, and so that reactor became out of date. I wonder if you could say anything about why there hasn't been more traction with opposition to nuclear power after Fukushima.
I would say, I think you saw how they treated the contaminated water. They released it into the sea, and also after Fukushima, they had to evacuate that town and then move to the different place, and that raises a question about their identity as a residents there, because some people had agricultural business or maybe some related business, and they have to put a pause, and they basically have to restart their life from scratch again. Basically, it damages their identity and also the way they treated the nuclear waste. And also, there's an interesting magazine, actually you can get in library here. There's a worker from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. At the time, he was working there, and then he saw how government doesn't disclose the information, what's going on. So when they opened his magazine, what he says is that actually the worker that's working there is like 24 hours operations. People take time and they have to operate and make sure it's safe. And actually they measure the radiation rate,
Yeah.
and it's actually really high. So basically they are hosting their life and health issues, but it's kind of like a bad cycle because they target those people who cannot get a job, and then this job becomes really lucrative. It's kind of a high salary because they are risking their life. And those things came to a little bit public, those people who questions about what's going on behind. So I think that pushed so much of the energy towards the oppositions and the anti-nuclear movement.
But so far, they haven't been able to change policy.
No, it's interesting because in my city, Hiroshima, they have opposition towards to nuclear weapons, but they don't see as tied as nuclear energy strong enough. But if you take a look at Tokyo anti-nuclear movement focusing on both nuclear energy and nuclear weapons ties, so I think this is my assumptions, but it depends on the prefecture, their energy and their temperature towards like the nuclear energy, anti-nuclear energy is kind of different, and that's that's leads to the inconsistent anti-nuclear movement towards nuclear energy.
But it also shows that the government and TEPCO are very insulated from public opinion.
Yes, yes, yes.
Just kind of coming back to what we discussed in class is kind of also dependence on energy exports. Yeah, the nuclear is huge for Japan. It's extremely important. So I would guess it would be easier to suppress voices than to allow it to come back. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments, questions? Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I talked already, here you go to Thomas.
Okay, Thomas.
I just wanted to ask quickly more to do with the research design. What was the process of choosing the two places that you used for the case studies?
I have this from the it's historically connected. Actually Canada and Japan. It's interestingly there's an indigenous sector delineating indigenous people in Canada. Back in the World War II, they have to contribute themselves to produce plutonium or the nuclear atomic bomb that dropped in Hiroshima. And I didn't know this, and I started looking into it. And they actually come to Hiroshima, and then they share the legacy and histories, and that's kind of like naturally led me to think about Ontario and Hokkaido. And also Hokkaido is the only places that indigenous people exist. And for the Ontario, I've been talking to some professors, and some professors mentioned about this case, and they were so strong oppositions towards to this NSDF. So that's the reason why I chose to take a look at these two cases.
Super interesting. I was just gonna say, if you're ever going anywhere further, the timing of nuclear energy and weapons is like the same kind of thing is also happening in Germany right now. So if you ever want to, it's the same instead of two different.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting, and also I kind of see why. I don't know. I kind of get it.
What do you mean by that? You see
Like,
why?
I kind of see why they're being treated as the same, because it, and not to get into like logical fallacies, but it does kind of feel like almost a slippery slope. You know, if you start to have lots of nuclear energy integration, then it feels like the step to nuclear weapons is closer. You know, it doesn't feel like that drastic of a movement. So I kind of get why countries like Germany are starting to kind of treat that, at least socially, as the same.
Yeah, well, our team point, your point is really important there too, because Germans feel so energy insecure now, they cut off the Russian gas. So that opens the political opportunity for the pro-nuclear movement to actually make inroads. Anyone else have any other comments or questions that they want to share? So, Doug, did you have something?
No, thank you.
So I think.
I'm just gonna
Go
throw
ahead.
something. There was, now it's sports betting, but KGO from San Francisco was a very high wattage. We would get it here, we still do. And there was one, usually they had liberal, they had their own in-house talk people. There was a guy, Bill Wattenberg, and he was really big on nuclear power. He's one of the token conservative people. He always brought up this, and he had that nasty personality, so this doesn't mean I'm taking this, I'm mispresenting what he said. He said that, the people in France were using the German nuclear power for themselves. That they were so anti-nuclear, but the Germans were where they were getting the power from. To talk about Europe, what's going on in Europe with nuclear power and so on.
Well, France, as you probably know, has been one of the leading users or proponents of nuclear power. And they're one of the few that will actually run nuclear, energy
I may have gotten it backwards.
through two different cycles.
So I maybe got it backwards.
Yeah.
So
So France,
the French were giving it to Germany, and the Germans
Yeah, that's
were
right.
against it.
So France is one of the
I got
largest users of nuclear power. I think it might be 40% of their electricity mix, huge percentage. And they run the uranium through the processing twice. They reprocess it, and that leads to a much longer half-life for their nuclear waste. So they've been highly dependent on nuclear power, but you're right, it's such an
I got it
interesting.
backwards, I was just saying it
Yeah,
backwards.
yeah.
until what-
So it's such an interesting contrast with Germany and Eastern Europe because they had such a gut reaction to Chernobyl, but France never did. Energy insecurity again, right?
Yeah, and so how's it going with, in France with nuclear waste? How are they dealing with that? And you're saying that there's a even bigger.
Yeah, they still, like, the only other long-term solution that I've seen is this geological depository, which is, the only other place that has it is Finland. Yeah, for some reason Finland was able to get it passed, but no one else has besides Ignace up to now. Any other comments or questions? Alex, do you have any thoughts that you want to share?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, well, first let me thank you, Fujiki, for a very interesting and insightful presentation. When we get, I think a lot of these debates over nuclear power and the nuclear fuel cycle are really jurisdiction dependent. And your discussion, for example, of the difference between Germany and France bring that to mind. I think more profoundly in Germany, which was then the West Germany in the 1970s, was the birth of the Greens. And there was a critical decision to use state power against environmentalists that sort of live up to the older authoritarian notions of the state in Germany, and to go with the more contemporary political culture after 1949, which was only make decisions when you have consensus. So they ran their country and really these grand coalitions between the conservatives and the liberals and the social democrats, which kind of would make no sense, save that a political culture that was based on at that time on consensus. And of course, particular thanks to Germany being between East and West, where the NATO battlefield was on the intended to be on the East German plains. You can see how the Greens would be born and out of a non-affiliation with East and West and so forth. So there's a number of unique combinations. Ontario itself, until recently, had an extraordinarily high dependence on nuclear power. You'd mentioned the tied in directly to the life cycle of the and development of the CANDU reactor and process, which I think, as you correctly observed, really didn't renew itself into a second and third generation very well. The residents of that technology is all over the country. So they had one plant in, it was actually a French design in Quebec, which is mothballed. And of course, in New Brunswick, there's one installation that's caused an awful lot of difficulty, primarily because they couldn't get buyers for their surplus electricity. So they had this huge nuclear plant in a small jurisdiction that it was just didn't work out well. The latest generation, of course, are these pocket nukes, these and so forth. And I think one of your participants kind of adequately went over that. It sounds very seductive in terms of technology, but as with all the nuclear options, the question of the nuclear fuel cycle is not fully addressed. I don't know, I think it's quite clear in British Columbia and in Quebec and perhaps Manitoba, and Newfoundland, there's no particular need at all for a nuclear option. But I think if you ask those themed questions to residents of the Canadian prairies or in Ontario in the long term, I think you might find very different assessments of that. And so I think that as a country, Canada as a jurisdiction is going to be it's going to have this nuclear fuel cycle problem and so forth for a long time to come. It's not going to go away. And similarly, though I always step outside of my comparative knowledge and greatly, I tend to think the same thing would occur in Japan, that the nuclear option will be buried in political cycles. But my reading, of course, is distant and superficial. But I get a sense that at an elite level, there's still a commitment to the nuclear option in Japan. And so I think then again, Japan is going to have a continual a life with this problem. I really enjoyed the way you set that out. And I think it's such a rich topic to go with. I think that was one, but I think in terms of Japanese politics, it's also a symbolic question about the confidence the Japanese have in elites, and and do Japanese live up to the fabled reputation as being to innovate and find technological solutions to this problem and so forth. So I think this is a real challenge for the Japanese, and I'm not too sure that will how that will go. But I like this particular presentation because I really appreciated it, the work you've done into it, because I think that those coastal communities and that culture, which that identity of communities, which are, just hundreds and hundreds, a millennium old, and how those are threatened. That notion of the tie to the sea or the tie to the land in Japan is something that I don't think a lot of people appreciate.
So much, Alex. It is really mind-boggling how anyone can put a nuclear plant near a body of water after Fukushima, right? Like, how could they do that in the first place? And that was the main concern with the repository in Ontario, that it was in proximity of the Great Lakes, and another disaster waiting to happen. But I think Alex is really right. Like, the framework you provide is really applicable to a lot of different political movements. If you think about the green transition and the movement to try to move to clean energy as part of the response to climate change, there isn't any coherent movement that is, for action against fossil fuels. Fossil fuel lobby is super well organized. There aren't any real adequate resources. The fossil fuel lobby is by far the most powerful lobby in Canada. And space for political opportunities, after everyone has just turned their back on the Paris Agreement, is really shrinking, because now the government will say, well, we're in a political crisis, so we have to worry about immediate economic gains and not worry about climate change, because that will cost jobs, which is also false. But I will leave it to you. Do you have any last thoughts you want to share?
No, but I really appreciate all your energy and taking time here to listen to my presentations. Yeah.
Great, thanks everyone, and hope to see you in November. We have a professor coming up from Western